Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Business. I'm your host, Katrin Becker. On this podcast, we love to say, well, while a smart person learns from their mistakes, a genius learns from others. And in that vein, we bring together experts and successful people from all different industries, all different roles in life, so that we can learn what they have learned, so that we can either avoid those mistakes altogether or we can learn faster. Today's guest is really interesting. I'm so glad to have her here. Her name is Mariah Magazine, and she is an SEO consultant and online business educator. And so while that is a very interesting topic all in of itself, she has a really different way of looking at things that I think is going to be a really interesting topic and something that we can all learn from. So Mariah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
And you are also a podcaster. So let's plug your podcast before we dive into it. What's the name of it?
Yeah, it's the Curiously Guided podcast. So it's a podcast for intentional business owners and curious minds. In the conversations, we kind of like to combine the inner work with the outer work to help create a life and a business and a career that feels deeply fulfilling and like wildly aligned versus the things that focus just on the inner work or the outer work. Me and my co-host Shay, we kind of see the magic in really like carefully combining and balancing both of them.
Oh, I love how you said that. And it's so true because we are whole beings. And yet so much only addresses like one aspect with completely ignoring the other side. And you're like, but wait, like I always get on my high horse around work-life balance as a topic of just, that's a terrible way to state that because there's so much more to it and it doesn't have to be in opposition, which is how balance works typically.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the business world, everybody's so focused on like the frameworks, the strategies, the ROIs, all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but like you have to balance it with the inner work.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, we talk about that a lot on this podcast too, of, what things people had to overcome in order to find the success. And it's not always an overnight success. So before we kind of get into the juicy bits, you have been in business for 8 years, which is a huge testament because so many new entrepreneurs, flounder and end up not succeeding. So you've obviously found some good secret sauces along the way. So give us a quick introduction on what it is that you do, and then we'll kind of go into the how you got there.
Yeah, so I'm an SEO consultant and an online business educator for entrepreneurs over at mariahmagazine.com. And honestly, I'm just like a firm believer that showing up on Google, increasing your visibility, growing your business doesn't have to be as difficult and as overwhelming as everybody makes it. And so, like you said, I do have 8 years of experience as an entrepreneur in the online and digital marketing space. In that time, I've been able to help over 150 clients get found on Google by implementing a strategy that feels both doable and aligned. But when I first got into business, it wasn't SEO. It literally, I thought SEO was like the worst thing on the planet. It was so overwhelming. I was like, yuck, this is gross. But I got into the industry and like this online business space, which I also refer to it as just like a portal. I feel like when you open up the door to the online business world compared to like the corporate business world, you can't unsee all of the like unlimited possibilities that are waiting for you that like the internet brings forward for us. And so I got into the industry doing website design and development. And so I would help my clients create websites and all of that stuff. We would launch them. And then clients were like, now what? And I was like, I don't know. Like my job is done. Thank you so much.
Go figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. But this was also when business was brand new. So I also had a lot more time than money. And what I realized pretty quickly, and I didn't realize this when I was messing around in college and high school and all of that, is that I have this gift of being able to break down complex things into easy to understand ways. And because I started realizing and noticing that, I ended up creating a blog and like blogging about like what I was learning about the online business space. But just like my clients, I was like, okay, the blog's up. Now what? Like, how do I get traffic to it? And so I was like, oh crap, I guess that I'm going to have to learn SEO. And so when I went in to learn all of this, it was like super overwhelming. I was getting found, like I was finding content on the internet about it was like SEO agencies talking to either like higher up SEO people that were like more advanced, and they were talking about SEO strategies for like HubSpot marketing, neilpatel.com, and just like these bigger corporate websites where the smaller online business owner or even local business owner didn't need those advanced strategies. But then the other SEO content that was found on the internet was from local SEO agencies trying to make all of this a big mystery or overwhelm you so that you would
Yes.
just hire them to do it. And so I was like, I'm smart. I'm going to figure this out. So I kind of just like took it apart and put it back together in a way that makes sense. And then I've kind of just been like testing and tweaking and experimenting and growing my business ever since.
I love what you said in the beginning, that you realized there was something that you were good at that you didn't realize other people didn't. I really do feel like that's the hugest thing to overcome, because it comes so naturally to each of us, whatever that superpower is, that we don't realize that it's hard for other people. So how did you even come to find that that was your magic?
I feel like it's clear, it's a lot clearer now than it was then. So like even then I had this way of like, I can figure out how to create a website, design things like graphic design. I can figure out admin and bookkeeping. Like I can figure things out really quickly. And then I just noticed from talking to other people. So I would hop on coffee chats, or I would just like in local networking groups, like I would just talk about something. Somebody's like, whoa, how did you figure that out? And it was just from the feedback of like having conversations where I noticed people were like, wait, you figured that out? Like, okay, that makes sense. But then if we even take it a little bit further back than that, I've been like a Pinterest girl for ever since like the thing became a thing. And I've always kind of like looked at DIY tutorials and then just tried to figure it out myself. And I feel like that's kind of where it started sticking with me, because I would post pictures on Instagram or Facebook about like these things that I created. And everybody was like, wait, how did you do that? And I'm like, oh, you just do this and then do this. And then they were like, you explain that way better than the tutorial on Pinterest. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I was like, I don't know. I feel like I understand it. And then there was also my mom. She would always tell me growing up, like, whatever you touch turns to gold. And like, I didn't realize how impactful that was in my mindset until later on in my career, of just like having that little voice in my head, like, hey, you can do this if you just take a second to like allow yourself to absorb it and then test and tweak to figure it out.
I mean, what a great gift your mom gave you of planting
Truly.
that seed in your subconscious, because we don't even realize the extent of things that our parents, teachers, friends, whomever we spend a lot of time with, what they say, how it impacts us. I mean, everyone's heard the phrase, like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But it's really true, because their thoughts, their belief patterns, it's all being implanted into our subconscious. And then we're acting in a way that we're like, gosh, this doesn't quite feel aligned. Like, and get to a point. And I think that's why people have midlife crisis, because you get to this point where all of a sudden you're like, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
I've absorbed all this other crap from people, and now I don't know who I am. And so I know you talk a lot about being able to like prioritizing yourself and finding your zone of genius. And gosh, we all need to do that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely like it's a muscle that you have to strengthen. It's not like I woke up one day and was like, oh my gosh, I am so good at this. It was like I was paying attention to the nudges. I was paying attention to like people's reactions when I would do things. But I think even before that, I was willing to take action. I'm an experimenter and like a little creative scientist at heart. Like, I just want to know what's going to happen. I'm naturally extremely curious. Like, even before we started pressing record, I started asking you a bunch of questions and you're just like, wait a minute, you're the guest. And I was like, sorry. Like, I'm just naturally extremely curious. And so when I care about something, that curiosity just keeps getting fueled. And I think that's why I love the online business space, because I am literally obsessed with it. And I think that's also why I can absorb information and then be able to break things down. Like, I'm not saying that I'm some genius that like has an amazing memory. I'm just willing to take the action steps to figure it out. And it's through that testing and tweaking and trusting myself that I can figure it out, that has allowed me to get the data points to be able to connect the dots. But I didn't just like in my journal be like, this is my zone of genius.
It didn't come to you like a meditation, like
I wish.
did I angel
did I beg
singing?
for it? I beg for it. Just tell me, please just tell me.
Just tell me what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then monetization, of course, is a whole another aspect of that. But before we switch, I love what you said about being a creative scientist, because I've had several guests on here that are in the digital marketing space, and it's coming through so clearly of all of the testing and experimenting that is required in that. And so many people, as themes come up and arise through the different guests that we've had on here of that aspect of things. And I feel like we don't give it enough credit of the similarities between marketing, which is seen as so creative, and science, which is generally not seen as creative, but there's this very similar skill set of the curiosity and the testing and it's almost like it's not, you don't take it personally. Like a scientist is never going to do an experiment and say, oh, I have a hypothesis that A is going to happen. And then when B happens, they're not like, wah, wah, my self-worth just went down. This must mean something personal. But I feel like entrepreneurs do take it personally when they try something marketing online and it fails. Have you seen that with your clients?
Yeah. And I think it's because the expectations that other people give with marketing. Like you could go on social media, you could go on Instagram, and they're just like, make $500,000 by blowing your nose 6 times. And like, it is so easy. And it's like, you're giving people false expectations when really it actually takes a lot of work, or there's virality involved, or getting lucky. But if none of those things happen, then all you can keep doing is coming back to the drawing board, figuring something out, throwing it out there, and testing and tweaking. But the other piece of it is that a lot of people are selling frameworks. Like, I mean, I don't sell my framework per se, but like I have a process in the way that I do things. But if there was another SEO strategist that was like, hey, teach me everything you know, I can teach them everything I know, but it might not work in the way that it works for me because it's not their process.
Yeah, they're not you.
And so people want this framework and they want to use it as their own so that they can replicate somebody else's success. But what they're missing is that the reason why that was successful is because it aligned with the actual person that did it, versus like, hey, let me learn your framework, let me learn best practices, and then be willing to throw things at the wall and test your way through the actual process. It's through that you're able to see the way that things work for you, and then you can come back to the drawing board and kind of like change things accordingly.
Oh, I mean, 100%. And I love using the zone of genius. I mean, the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, I read it several years ago, and it really put things in different perspective about the different zones. Is that a book that you have taken inspiration from as well?
No, I don't think I've ever read it.
That was the first time I've ever heard someone talk about the zone of genius. Is
really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've never read it.
I thought that was his thing. Well, okay, where did you come up with
it? Might be. It might be. I don't know. It's through like having conversations with other business owners. And it was through like me self-reflecting and me being like, okay, so I guess the question that a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs always ask is like, what is my goal? Right? Like, what am I trying to achieve? What is my goal? That has always felt it's felt very constricting to me, my goal. And then I know myself, I'll become like perfectionist and I'll lose track of that experimenter, that play that comes with it. And then I will try to over strategize everything in order to hit that goal. And then I don't end up hitting that goal because there wasn't any sense of play and creativity and experimental in there. So instead, what I look at it is like, what am I desiring right now? What do I desire? And then it was like through that reflection and then reflecting on like the tasks that I was doing day to day. And then, like I said, having conversations with friends. And we were just like, wait a minute, I feel like this is like truly my zone of genius. Like, I think I'm a genius here. And like, genius is a word. I didn't even realize how much I use that word until I started co-hosting my podcast. And like, after we would interview somebody, I would Voxer my co-host. And I was like, yo, we're geniuses. Like, that episode was so good, dude. And she was like, we're geniuses. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't realize how much I said it. But then I just like, the word just makes sense to me because like, none of us are created like anybody else. We each have our genius, but it's so different. And like my favorite quote is like, you can't judge a fish's ability on climbing a tree, on how to
Right.
climb a tree, because like that's not their genius. They are not meant to climb trees. They are meant to swim in the water. And so I think that as humans, we do that all of the time. And look at the way that school was created. We're all doing the same thing, learning the same thing
Oh,
in the same way. And
yeah,
so it just like suffocates us and makes us then compare ourselves to everybody else because that's what we've been taught. When really the juice is, especially if you want to grow your own business, your own career that like feels deeply fulfilling, you have to get really, really curious and really honest with yourself about like, what am I good at? Like, what is the juice that I have that like I can't stop talking about it, wishing for it, working towards it? Like that's the magic right there. And it's no coincidence that that stuff is like what aligns with our zone of genius. Like I don't think that our
absolutely.
gifts are an accident. And so like, can we allow ourselves to explore that?
Oh, social media, I think, has made it so much worse, because it's so easy to fall into the comparison trap. And we know that
Mhm.
comparison is the thief of joy, that because we're seeing these other things. But I also think that, and I've seen this with my clients over the years, is just even knowing what it is that they desire, most people can't even verbalize it. Or, if it, and in relation to business, maybe it's like a revenue goal or something like that, but that doesn't have nearly the same emotional connection as like, why do you want that money? Like, what does that money represent for you? What does it mean? Like, why did you pick, $20,000 a month? Like, what does that mean?
Yep.
And really taking it back from there. And I think the word authenticity gets thrown around so much, but there's so many people that you'll see on like social media that look exactly the same as each other, all talking about authenticity. And it's like, how is
Mhm.
that actually authentic?
Yeah.
Like how is that? So it's great that you bring that point up. And I think it's funny that I talk about genius at the beginning of all of my episodes, and then here we are talking about genius in a different capacity. So I think that's really cool. So I mean, you've been doing this for 8 years and learning all these things. Do you feel like you figured it out, or do you feel like you're just at the next step and there's still more to come?
I think I figured it out based on where I am and who I am today. Like I feel really clear about like what my zone of genius is and like a wider capacity for who I am today. But like as I continue to experiment, as I continue to evolve, I'm going to continue to peel back layers of who I am and like have a next evolution of who I am. So I don't know what my zone of genius is going to be like in this next evolution. I'm not sure yet. It's probably going to get fine-tuned, but I have like a basic understanding of like what truly brings me joy. And so I think that that's just going to like show up in like in different ways and in different paths.
Do you feel comfortable sharing what that is
Oh,
that
for
brings you
sure.
joy?
Yeah. So okay. So when I was trying to grow my business, when I was like, you know what, I'm sticking with SEO after I decided to move away from website development. And so I worked with coaches and everybody was like, well, if you want to create sustainable income, an SEO agency is the way to do it. Build an SEO agency, build an agency, build an agency, build an agency. Every time somebody said that, my entire gut constricted. I was like, I had a
Mm,
visceral reaction. I literally was like, ugh. I'm not saying that agencies are wrong. I'm not saying that they're bad. They're just not me. I've never wanted to grow an agency. I never wanted to have a massive team. I never wanted to be like behind managing a bunch of people. I love this. This is what I love. And so that's why I got annoyed with website design because I would have to sit behind the computer working by myself all of the time. There was no space for connection. There was no space for communication. But if I didn't do that, I wouldn't realize what I didn't like about it. So I feel like that's a really good way to be able to narrow things down. Start with the stuff that you don't like. And so then I was like, okay, if I don't want an agency, then what do I want? Well, then I was like, you know what? I love having conversations with people. I love consulting. So then the next thing was, okay, consulting retainers, get people on consulting retainers. I was like, You know what? After doing that, I was like, nah, I don't really like the super long drawn out projects. Okay, what do I like? Well, I ended up creating, it's called an SEO strategy intensive. And so it's a 2-hour session where like I get on with a client and I tell them, listen, your brains are going to be scattered on the wall, but you're going to feel so good when this stuff mellows. And like I'm able to share how I'm seeing SEO and the data and the strategy and the patterns with them on the call as I'm educating them. So I was like, okay, I think there's an education piece here. And so then I realized, you know what? I actually truly love the education part of it just as much as I love the consulting part. It's not the consulting like retainer. I want people to keep hiring me over and over again, which by all means, like, yeah, you can hire me over and over again. But what I like is empowering people to understand this, because what I didn't like about the SEO agency model is that they kept everything behind a curtain. And then when you stopped paying, you were left with, I have no idea what they did, and I have no idea how to keep this going. Well, I was like, you know what? I would rather educate as we're diving into the strategy. Let me explain to you what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and why we have to think about it this way. And I love questions. I didn't realize that I loved questions until I would pitch myself to be on podcasts, until I was having conversations with friends. And I realized that like when I really get into the flow, it's when somebody asks me a question. For some reason, like my brain is just like, I can respond to that. And then I don't even know what I'm saying as I'm saying it. It kind of all just comes out. And I was like, I feel like this is like part of my genius. I'm like really good at answering questions in the topic and in the niche that I care about in the world of marketing and visibility and online business. If you want me to do a Q&A about setting up a dishwasher, I have zero idea and I have nothing to say.
You're not the girl for that.
I am not the girl for that. So I feel like it's honestly, I've just figured this out by process of elimination. And then what has also been really interesting is that through my entire business trajectory, like I have really always prioritized creating content. But for a while, I stopped creating content because I had to figure out how to grow an SEO agency, or I had to figure out this retainer model. And so I put creating content on the back burner. And then I was burnt out. I was overwhelmed and I hated my business. And I was like, why am I building a business that I don't like? So I was like, what am I missing? It's the content creation part of it, where a lot of business owners don't like it. I love it because it connects with the education part and it connects with the strategy part. So it's like through just continuous testing and tweaking and allowing myself to reflect and always ask, did I like this? Did I not like this? It's just taken things by elimination, essentially. So I would say zone of genius, if I had to boil it down, it's essentially like breaking down complex things into easy to understand ways. I love Q&As. And I love being able to break down a strategy and like help somebody feel empowered by it. So it's like that intuitive piece that I can call on, because like as I'm watching my clients, their body language or the way that they're reacting, even when I'm going into like a super strategic thing like SEO, I can literally be like, I feel like this, like you don't like this. So like, why don't you like this? Like, let's talk about it. And so it's like all of that kind of like combined into it.
So I love everything you said, but I do want to ask a maybe more contradictory question, because, yes, finding your zone of genius is wonderful and getting those tweaks, but what about the weaknesses? Like your strengths, your zone of genius, like once you can find that, that's only going to get you so far. But you still have like weaknesses weighing you down. So like how do you think about your weaknesses, and do you put any effort into improving them?
I build my business based on my strengths. So if I do, like, let's say like long-term projects, I have worked on long-term projects, but I kind of see those as like a way to create space or income or resources for me to step deeper into the education and consulting role. So I kind of see like the weaknesses or like the other, maybe like not ideal projects as like my day job that like will pay the bills, or like that then sources all of my other space and my flexibility in order to grow where I want to grow. So like to build a business that really aligns with my zone of genius, passive income is very important to me. And so it takes time to build that up. It takes time to build up my YouTube channel and to sell these workshops that I want to. So in order to get the income from these passive income projects, from these workshops and stuff, I still have to do like done for you SEO work, but I don't see that as like a weakness. I see it as like part of the journey that like is allowing me to then step deeper into this. But the more clear I am about my zone, the more intentional I can be about how I'm spending my time and what done for you projects I'm taking on.
I mean, I think the other thing that really is coming through for me is it's not an overnight process.
No.
It can be a very slow, iterative process. And
Very intentional. Yeah.
it has to be that way. And I think there's, just like we were saying at the beginning, kind of, the weight of others' expectations and what that means. There's also this expectation of like, okay, you went into your business for yourself, like the money should be pouring in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for people who've never been business owners or entrepreneurs, they show up to work at a job and they get a paycheck that week, right? Like it's a totally different mindset. And I feel like it's hard for people who've never experienced it to understand it. So how did you come to terms with the timing of things and learning to just be okay with the process as it is?
I think that there's pros and cons with any decision that we make. So you have to decide like what is the less annoying one. And to me, building a business was a less annoying option. If I think about like working in corporate, that feels like completely constricting to me, where it's like maybe like, especially in the beginning of my business, revenue wasn't always skyrocketing and going up. Like I've had dips, I have had moments where I've been horrified. But I would also say that I was really lucky when I started my business, I was 22. And so I was really lucky to be able to still live with my parents for 4 years after that, to really allow myself to have the space to figure this out. So I think it comes down to like, where can you create stability in your life in order to allow you the freedom and flexibility to test and tweak? So it doesn't have to be like jumping all in. You can also we also have a nervous system that matters. We also have to afford bills. We also have to afford these things that we have in our lives. So sometimes that's why it comes down to baby steps, essentially. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
I mean, it was a good answer. I don't know if it answered it either. And that's okay. I mean, that's the point, is just this discussion and having it flow and see where it goes. I mean, I think it's just tricky to be a human sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that people that try to pretend like it's not tricky are lying to themselves or setting people up with false expectations. It's the same thing. Like even to this day, 8 years in business, I can launch a workshop and it can flop. And so I can be upset about that. And then I allow myself to feel how I want to feel about it. And then I come back to the drawing board and then I try again. I feel like that's the thing. Like I'm just always collecting data points. That's it. That's all this is an experiment. Anybody that tells you like they have solved like the online business stuff, I don't think that they have. I think that maybe they've solved it for them right here in this moment. But like, especially in the online business space, we've seen so many people that have grown massive businesses want to take a sabbatical, or they completely shut their business down. And that's because they didn't self-reflect along the process and take those micro pivots and come back to themselves. And before they knew it, they grew a business that they hated.
Yeah.
And so I think like it's so important to remember that this stuff takes time, but why would we not want it to take time? Like in order to build something that's truly sustainable, you have to figure out who you are as you evolve with it. And so you have to interact with your business. Your business should evolve as you evolve. And so like it's just consistent change. And I think a lot of people think, and like I even fall into this sometimes, where it's like, once I figure this out, it's all going to be figured out and I'm going to be good to go. No, that never happens. Literally
No,
never.
ever.
And so I think just coming to terms with that. Like you get better at picking yourself up from failure or for things not going aligned with your expectations. Like the very first time that I held a workshop, it was awful. I had one person show up live. I literally finished it, closed it down, and cried in bed for 3 hours because it was just like, that is not what I wanted. I didn't like how my nervous system felt. I felt super vulnerable. I had a vulnerability hangover. It was super outside of my comfort zone. But it's like, so what? I'm just going to allow that to be like, you know what? Workshops ain't it. But the data points that I was collecting behind the scenes from that moment pointed to something else. And then when I hosted a workshop a couple of years later, I was still extremely nervous, but I built up that resiliency in myself. I released the expectation that it needed to be perfect and allowed myself to wing it because at the end of the day, I'm just collecting data points.
And when you can take the emotionality out of it, which is really hard for some people to not have it connected to our self-worth in any sort of way, that it's just data points. And I love to think about like there's big, giant companies that have had massive flops.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you think about Google. I mean, it's a huge company, right? Massive. When they came out with the Google Lens, the eyeglasses, like it was a giant flop. And you think about all the people and all the money and all the resources that went in behind that, creating that, and they can still have flops. But they don't fail. They're still there. You only fail when you give up or you don't learn from what you've learned. It's just a data point.
Yeah. And I think that like you mentioned removing your emotions from it. I think to a certain aspect, sure, but like we're also human. I think that it's not about removing the emotion from it. It's removing your self-worth from the expectation because it's like, I want you to feel the emotion. I want you to feel the desire. I want you to feel the fear. I want you to feel the sadness. That's part of being human. And I think that your emotions are how we can navigate and figure out your zone of genius. Come back to your emotions. There is power there. But we also have to expand the capacity to hold the emotions on new levels because we can't let the fear stop us. We have to feel the fear and then question it. Why am I feeling this fear? And so I don't think like, I guess I see the data points as like a combination of both of them. It's the strategy and the energetics of it. But at the end of the day, like I can still see data points that are connected with my emotion. So it's like, oh, I feel fear when I do this. That's a data point. So like the emotion can be tied up in there.
Yeah. I mean, I know from where I've come through in my journey, like when I hear you say those things, I know that is years in the making to get to that point. And for most people, they're not there yet, and they don't know how to hold the emotion and process it through without having it still be super alive and well. So when I say remove the emotion, it's more for the people who aren't there in the journey yet. Because it does take a lot of time to get to that piece. So maybe saying remove the emotion isn't the correct way, but looking at it objectively.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's ways to take it back of like, you know, you drop something, you can say, I'm an idiot, right? You're super in the emotion of it instead of, you know, a step back from that is, oh, that was a stupid thing that I did, right? That's a level back of removing the emotion. And then you can go, you know, even further back and further back and further back, many iterations so that you're still can acknowledge it without it driving the bus, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just putting that out there for people who haven't had the experience you've had to get to that point, because it is a journey and we all are on different points of that. And it's the small iterative tweaks that you just get a little bit better and a little bit better each time with that. So one thing before we wrap up is, you know, bringing it back to your business, because I think we had a great discussion of the underneath, right? The soft belly that we don't always see of things, but bringing it back to business and to SEO, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how, you know, the advance of and the proliferation of AI and the large language models is affecting SEO, and what should business owners know about that? Because I think there can be a lot of fear from that perspective of the unknown and just not knowing how it's going to affect them in the future. So I'd love your perspective on that before we wrap up.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people are overwhelmed with AI. And to be honest, when I first heard of it, I was like, oh man, am I about to be like out of a job? Like, are people not about to need me anymore? Is Google going to go under? But as I've kind of researched into it, I feel excited about it. I think that just like everything else, everything is always changing. So once we think we have it figured out, we actually don't have it figured out. And now we just have something else to kind of test and tweak with. And the way that I look at it is like Google makes a ton of money from Google Ads. There is no way Google is going to like completely get rid of organic search or Google Ads because that's how they make massive amounts of money. I think what is going to be increasingly more important, and I started seeing it years ago, well, probably like a year and a half, 2 years ago, before AI actually got like really pushed out into the public, is that what matters even more so now than ever is your perspective and your expertise. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people, like my clients, sometimes we'll see a keyword, for example, and it's like, okay, well, in order to target that keyword, we have to have content or a page or a post around that specific keyword. And so a lot of people will be like, oh, I'll use ChatGPT to go ahead and to create this blog post. But if you've used ChatGPT, the AI model, in order to generate the content for you, and you read it, it falls flat. It doesn't have that human emotion. It doesn't have your perspective. It doesn't have your tone, especially like with business owners, your brand tone. I have tested and tweaked and used different AI tools in order to try to generate a blog post because I was like, I'm just going to test this out. My brand tone is so connected to the way that I speak that literally it was way more work for me to even start with a blog post created by AI and then try to go ahead and infuse my tone in there. It's easier to use AI to help with outlines, to help with research, to help with brainstorming. And then, or you can even like have an outline and have it get you started so that like a lot of my clients, they don't want to look at a blank Google Doc. That's super overwhelming to them. So
Yeah.
using AI to help with that, like that brainstorming beginning piece of it, and then infusing your personality into it, that's what's going to make a difference. So I think that it's that because Google is also getting extremely focused on not showing too generic of results in Google search. Now, obviously, some are going to slip through the cracks, and that's fine. And Google said that if you create something with AI, it's not that we're going to completely like drop it out. It depends on how that content is then tweaked and does it solve the problem for the user. So the question always comes back to, is this the best solution to the user? And more times than not, we see that AI generated content falls flat. There's no human emotion. There's no perspective. The tone is whack. And so I think that really diving into like what you care about, why you care about it, and infusing your experience into your content, into your website is going to be increasingly more important. So that's one thing. And the other thing, I think YouTube's going to blow up.
Mm.
Because YouTube being on video, it's kind of like a visual clue or visual confirmation that like this is an actual person. This is a person, this isn't generated from AI, and I can get somebody's perspective without thinking that it was generated by AI. So I think YouTube is going to blow up too.
That's a really good point, and I'm really glad that you said that because that's not something that I've heard. I'm not something that I've heard about like that, and it makes a lot of sense because we still want and crave that human connection. I
I
mean,
think we're going to crave it even more.
yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Well, this was amazing, Mariah. I've really enjoyed having this conversation, and I think we're really aligned on so many different ways that we think and work on things. So it's really great to have met you and to have this conversation. Thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I feel like I could talk about this stuff forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So final word to you, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to discuss? Like, how do people reach out to you? Who's your ideal client? Any of that kind of great information?
Yeah. So most of the people that I work with are online business owners. So like online business owner, like service providers, coaches, consultants, e-commerce shops. Those type of people is typically who I work the most with. So you can learn more about me over at mariahmagazine.com. You can check out my YouTube channel, mariahmagazine.video will take you over there. There's a bunch of tutorials for SEO, for website tech, for website stuff. And I am doing a YouTube live interview series where I'm interviewing other online business owners just to kind of help inspire and educate and like help people grow a business that feels good for them. So the conversations are just really like insightful. And if you enjoyed my spiel about everything and just the way that I talk about things, I think that you're definitely going to like the Curiously Guided podcast. You can learn more about that at curiouslyguided.com, or you can just search Curiously Guided on your listening platform.
Absolutely. And you can tell from this interview, this was not AI generated.
Exactly. I am not a robot.
Not a robot. We can check that little box. Like everyone's going to have to walk around and be like, not a robot.
Not a robot.
Well, this is great. Thank you for sharing all the different ways that we can connect with you. I will put all of the information in the show notes. So there are nice, lovely, clickable links in whichever platform you are listening to this so that you can reach out to Mariah, listen to her podcast, work with her, whatever has been calling to you as you listen through this. So thank you again so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast episode, I encourage you to like, subscribe, and share it with your network so we can continue to bring more amazing guests. If there is a certain subject, industry, profession that you are curious about and would like to learn more about, please reach out and I would be happy to find the perfect guest to interview. Until next time, everyone, have a good day.